They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So, the San Antonio Spurs confuse me. This is a team that I didn't expect to be very good. Nobody really expected them to be very good, and yet here they are. I believe they're 14-11 right now, sitting pretty in a playoff spot in the Western Conference. Every single time I feel like this team is about to fall off, I'm like, okay, well, you know, the magic is over. They're probably going to start losing some games in the near future. You know, it's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen tonight. It's going to happen tonight. Every time I think that, it doesn't happen. You know, they continue to put together wins. They continue to play well. You know, they haven't set the world on fire, right? They still, you know, have lost 11 games. It's not like they're one of the best teams in the league, but in the Western Conference, where a lot of teams are right in this range, you know, of like 3 games above 500 to around 3 games below, like everybody's all super bunched up in the West, and the Spurs are among the top of that group. I don't know how long they can necessarily sustain this, but they've been very, very impressive so far, and it's certainly something that not a lot of people expected. So let's just talk about the Spurs and why they've been so good so far. So the Spurs have been one of the most consistent teams this year. They haven't really had any big winning streaks or big losing streaks. It's like, you know, win a couple here, lose a couple here, win one, lose one. It's like they're a little bit up and down, but not too many highs and not too many lows, right? And like I said, they've won more games than they have lost. They're at 15-11. I just double checked that. Coming off a win over the Hawks tonight, where they were up like 30 at halftime. You know, they were up like 30, 40 points for most of the night. It actually only ended up being an 11-point victory for them. Not sure what happened there at the end. I think it was probably just garbage time kind of cut the lead. I'll be honest, I didn't really watch the end of the game, but they were up big for most of the night, and so that's pretty much a blowout there, I guess. And they've had a couple of nice wins on their resume, particularly early on in the season. They beat both LA teams back to back, beat the Clippers, and then 2 nights later beat the Lakers. Now that was, like I said, early on in the season, so you know, lots of things have changed between then and now, but those are still very quality wins to have on your resume, you know, against two of the best teams in the league, and they're just doing it, you know, night in, night out. Like I said, not too many, you know, ups and downs here. It's more just like, you know, really consistent basketball. They haven't been blown out a lot, and I think the one thing you can attribute all of this to is probably the coaching. We know that Gregg Popovich is one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the history of the league. He has had sustained success throughout his career, and the last couple of seasons have kind of been down for him, and it feels like people sort of forgot just how good he is, you know, because they missed the playoffs last year for the first time. The year before that, they were a low playoff seed, and so like the roster has slowly gotten worse over the past couple of years here. So it felt like, yes, Popovich is a good coach, but he probably can't do much with the team that he's been given here. But I think this season he's definitely proven all of that wrong. It feels like the team is playing together. They have a lot of young guys who are stepping up to the plate and really making this thing work. Specifically DeMar DeRozan, I have him in the background here. He's having a great season so far. Let's just look at his stats real quick. I have him over here. 20.3 points per game, which is, you know, not a career high for him, not necessarily great by his standards, but for the role that he is on this team, he's not necessarily like the star of this roster anymore. So he's, you know, been able to put up these good statistics on pretty good efficiency here, 49% from the field, which is pretty standard DeMar DeRozan stuff, and he's just doing it, you know, from the mid-range. Doesn't take a lot of threes, but, you know, he can get to the free throw line. He can do all the little things, and DeMar's a good veteran for this team to have. I don't know if he'll ever make another All-Star game in his career, but he's a guy who has definitely been very consistent for them this year, and he's getting it done, right? And even like LaMarcus Aldridge has been hurt, so it's really been kind of the DeMar show here. Him combined with Dejounte Murray, who has been awesome, especially defensively, you know, distributing the ball, all that stuff. Dejounte's really turning into a nice young player, and he's still a young guy. You know, a lot of people have been talking about it, especially after that game he had where he had like 8 steals and hit that game winner on the Warriors, which I was obviously very sad about, but he had a great game that night as well, and he's been a guy who has slowly improved over his career. Unfortunately lost that season earlier due to an injury, but he's back and he's healthy now, and I think the deal that they signed him to will prove to be a bargain. Last season was sort of a down year for him, but this year I think he's really come on strong, and he's still a guy, like I said, is very young, and he's coming into his own. And then if we can just talk about the rest of the young core, you've got a lot of guys like Keldon Johnson. I mentioned him in my stock video, where he is a guy who has really come out of nowhere to have a really, really strong sophomore campaign here. Didn't play much his rookie year, and all of a sudden he's getting minutes and making the most of them. Lonnie Walker has sort of been up and down, but he's another guy who you feel like has a lot of potential and is probably going to break out at some point. We've seen flashes from him. Derrick White just signed an extension, which a lot of people called an overpay, and he has, been struggling with injury at points this season, but I also feel like he's been pretty good. You've got Jakob Poeltl, who has statistically been one of the better defenders in the league so far this season, one of the better rim protectors. He's holding his opponents to low field goal percentages, which is cool. They've got a lot of young guys on this roster, and I kind of talked about this in the offseason, where the Spurs have like a ton of guys that are under 24, and then like a couple of these veterans on the team, and it's like, it feels like they're kind of split between two eras, but it's working out for them because all the veterans are playing well, and these young guys, like I said, are stepping up to the plate and really playing well so far. And it feels like their future is probably a little bit brighter than we realized, just because their player development system, it has been really, really good over the years. And this season is no exception. They're turning these late round picks, late first round draft picks into real NBA players. And like I mentioned, specifically with like Keldon Johnson and Lonnie Walker, even Derrick White, I believe, was a later pick. So these are guys who aren't necessarily, hugely heralded coming out of college, but I feel like they're making a huge impact here, and they're only going to continue to get better. And then I just took another look at their roster. I didn't even mention Devin Vassell, who was their first round pick this year. I really liked him in the draft. I think he's a guy who will be very, very good. I don't ever think he'll make an all-star team, but he's going to be like a really, really solid role player for his career, is how I project him right now. And I think the start of his career has really proven that he does have that potential, and he just has a solid foundation of a game. So I really, really like Devin Vassell here. Couple other guys who I feel like could pop. I did also really like Tre Jones in college. He was a guy who stayed a couple of years in college, and was a second round pick here. Not necessarily going to wow you, but he's a solid backup point guard, and I think if anybody can develop him, the Spurs can. Probably won't play much this season, but maybe a couple years down the line we could see Tre Jones making an impact here. And you have other guys like, let's see, Lonnie Walker I mentioned, Luka Samanic hasn't really played much, haven't seen much from him. Drew Eubanks I don't think is very good personally, but maybe there's something there. Keita Bates-Diop is another guy who had a lot of potential, and he's bounced around to a couple of different teams. Maybe the Spurs can get something out of him. They've got a lot of young pieces on this roster, and I don't think all of them are necessarily going to pop. But they've got some good guys here, and I feel like they can build out a quality team. They are going to need to find a star, somebody to lead these guys, especially given that DeRozan is entering free agency. LaMarcus Aldridge also. Both of those guys are in their 30s going up. So you're going to have to find a guy who is going to be able to take the load, and maybe that's Dejounte Murray. Who knows if his scoring will come around to the level that it needs to be at to really carry a team, but I feel like he can do all those other little things like I mentioned. But they're gonna have a lot of cap space this offseason, so maybe they can bring in somebody, and if that is the case, I feel like the Spurs can actually be pretty scary in the next couple of years. And as far as this year, I think they are firmly in the mix for, one of those lower playoff seeds, maybe one of the play-in spots in the Western Conference here. Like I said earlier, they're firmly sitting in 6th place. That's a half a game ahead of Denver and a half a game behind of Portland. These things are all changing every single night. A couple things break their way, they're all of a sudden the 4 seed. A couple things don't break their way, they're like down to 11. So it's very, very tight here in the Western Conference. Things are close. So they could easily, move up or fall down in the matter of a week. It just depends on how things go. But as of right now, they're in a playoff position. I do have my doubts on their ability to stay there. I think they're well coached. Like I said, I think they have a nice young foundation here. But I just think there's a couple of teams in this conference that probably have a little bit of a higher ceiling that I feel like aren't playing at that level right now that probably will come around. And the Spurs, they do have a couple of quality wins on their resume, but a lot of them have been, beating up on like bottom feeders in the Eastern Conference and, on Minnesota and OKC and stuff like that. So I would like to see them, get up against some more quality competition. But if we look at their schedule, schedule here, I was just looking at this. They don't have that many tough games coming up. They're going on an Eastern Conference road trip, and a lot of it is against like the bottom of the Eastern Conference. So they should have some chances to pick up some wins here. I just pulled this up. Their upcoming road trip, they just played Atlanta. They're going to at Charlotte, Detroit, Cleveland, New York, Indiana, OKC. So, you know, none of those are necessarily like contending teams. Like Indiana's pretty good. The Knicks have been, you know, pretty good so far. Charlotte, I guess, is okay, but you know, Detroit, Cleveland, OKC, like they have a chance to like get a winning streak going here, and if they can pick that up, they can, you know, buy themselves some time to really stay in the playoff hunt here in the West. That could go a long way because we're more than 1/3 of the way through the season. So, you know, it's not like all of this is a mirage, right? Like this team is actually good. They're playing together. They're playing well. So, you know, the West is going to be so tough. I've said this before, but I do feel like it's going to come down to the last night of the season for a couple of these teams here. I just think it's going to be that close. So I'd probably put them in with like maybe the Pelicans and the Kings, and I guess the Rockets might be a little bit below that. But maybe like Dallas, and there's a couple of other teams here that are like, you know, jockeying for those last couple of playoff positions there. But in the Western Conference, it's 10 spots for, you know, 13 teams that are trying to get in. And so it's just gonna be crazy close. But like I said, they've got an easy stretch of schedule coming up. So that's a really good chance for them to start putting a win streak together. And then you got to consider whether or not they're going to try to maybe make some moves at the deadline. They've been kind of rumored. You know, they, like I said, they have these veterans, not just DeRozan and Aldridge, but also guys like Rudy Gay and Patty Mills, who could potentially be moved for something at the trade deadline. Now, the Spurs have not been known to make in-season trades. They haven't really done it over the past, you know, ever since like we've had Popovich as the coach there and this current front office. They really haven't made any moves at the deadline, like maybe one or two little things, but it's just not something this franchise is known to do. Maybe that's changed, but at this point, I'm not necessarily sure. I think we could see, you know, Rudy Gay or Patty Mills potentially in trade rumors, but I just think the DeRozan Aldridge thing, they'll probably just let it play out and probably hold out for the cap space, because if they do trade him, they're probably taking contracts back, and that hits their cap space for next summer. So I do think that this team, while the media and fans will probably push them to maybe try to make some trades just because people think that's interesting, right? And I agree. That is, you know, like I said, one of my favorite parts of the NBA is all the trade stuff. But I would not be surprised to see the Spurs kind of just wait this one out, and maybe hold on to their assets and try to, you know, go into next summer with a ton of cap space, maybe bring a couple of those guys back on cheaper deals. But I mean, who knows? You know, they haven't really made any in-season trades in a long time. There's not necessarily any reason to suggest that that's going to all of a sudden change this year. And especially if they're playing well and in a playoff position, I just don't think it's going to happen. But I think that's all I have on the San Antonio Spurs. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Spurs. You know, what do you think about how their season's gone so far? Are you surprised by them? Because I certainly am. Are they going to make any moves at the deadline? Would love to hear your thoughts on that down below. But yeah, with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.